The sun was still low when the bus rolled through the gates of Fort Irwin, the sprawling U.S. Army Training Center, tucked deep in the Mojave Desert. The air shimmered with heat, though it was barely morning. The base buzzed with energy, boots stomping in rhythm, shouts echoing from drill instructors, engines roaring from armored vehicles moving in formation. For the new recruits, it was the first day of a journey that would test everything they thought they were. Among them sat Emily Carter, quiet and still, her duffel bag resting between her boots. Her hands, though small, were calloused, not the hands of a newcomer. Her short brown hair was tucked neatly under her cap, and a few strands stuck to her temple in the heat. She gazed out the window, watching the dust rise in soft waves as the bus came to a stop. When the doors hissed open, chaos erupted. Recruits stumbled out, squinting against the sunlight, dragging gear, and bumping into each other. Emily stepped down last, her movements unhurried, her expression unreadable. A few of the others noticed her calmness and smirked. "Looks like someone's too cool to be nervous," one muttered. Emily didn't respond. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and followed the line toward the drill square, where Sergeant Vega, a man built like a tank, stood waiting with his arms folded. His voice cut through the air like a gunshot. "Welcome to Fort Irwin," he barked. "You're not soldiers yet. You're lumps of clay, and we're here to shape you or break you. You will eat, breathe, and live discipline. If you think you're tough, the desert will fix that lie real quick." Emily's face remained calm. Her heartbeat stayed steady. She'd been through worse, far worse, though no one here knew that. To them, she was just another fresh recruit. Vega's gaze swept across the line, assessing faces. When his eyes landed on Emily, he paused for a fraction of a second. She held his stare without flinching. There was something in her eyes, not defiance, not fear, but experience. Vega had seen that look before, though rarely in new recruits. He made a mental note, but said nothing. The group was soon divided into units. Emily found herself with 7 others, all young, loud, and eager to prove themselves. The self-appointed leader, Ryan Haskins, strutted like he already owned the base. His father was a Marine colonel, and he never let anyone forget it. "Stick with me, people," Haskins said, grinning. "We're gonna crush this training cycle." Emily stood silently beside him, her posture perfect. Ryan glanced at her and raised an eyebrow. "You new to this?" he asked, smirking. "You don't talk much." "I talk when there's something worth saying," Emily replied softly. It earned a few chuckles from the others. One of them, a tall guy named Lopez, whispered loudly, "She probably got in through a friend of a friend. No way she survives Hell Week." Emily heard but didn't react. She'd heard worse, from soldiers who'd underestimated her in real war zones. The difference was, out there, the stakes weren't pride, they were life and death. By midday, the recruits were drenched in sweat and dust. The drills were brutal, running in formation, crawling under barbed wire, assembling and disassembling rifles under pressure. Emily did every task with quiet precision. She wasn't the fastest, but her movements were efficient, deliberate, like muscle memory honed from repetition. When they reached the obstacle course, things got louder. The recruits shouted, laughed, and competed, each trying to outdo the others. Ryan sprinted across beams and leaped walls, showing off. When Emily's turn came, a few of the others groaned. "This is going to be good," Lopez muttered. "Watch her fall." Emily ignored them. She moved carefully, testing the wooden beam before crossing it. Her rib ached, an old injury that had never quite healed, but she pushed through the pain silently. When she reached the rope climb, she paused, adjusted her grip, and started ascending. Her pace was slow, but steady. At the top, she didn't celebrate. She just looked down, scanning the field as if mapping every angle in her mind. Ryan clapped sarcastically. "You took your time, recruit," he said. "Maybe next time, bring a ladder." Vega overheard and barked. "Hoskins, you think this is a comedy show? Carter did the course correctly. You? You missed 2 checkpoints because you were too busy showing off. You think the enemy cares about your timing?" The laughter died instantly. Ryan's smirk faded. Emily glanced at Vega, giving a respectful nod of thanks, but he only grunted in return. He wasn't defending her, just enforcing order. Still, it was the first time someone had called out the arrogance that followed Ryan like a shadow. Later that evening, the recruits sat in the mess hall, devouring their rations. Conversations buzzed around the tables, mostly complaints about the heat, the pace, and Vega's relentless drills. Emily sat at the end of the table, quietly eating, listening to the chatter. "Hey, Carter," Lopez called out. "What did you do before this? You don't look like someone who worked outdoors." Emily hesitated, then said simply, "I worked in the field." "What kind of field?" Ryan asked with a grin. "Like nursing? Teaching?" Emily met his gaze. "Something like that," she said. They laughed, and she returned to her meal, unmoved. The truth was, she had been a combat medic, one of the few women embedded with frontline infantry units in Afghanistan. She'd patched wounds under gunfire, stopped bleeding with her bare hands, dragged wounded soldiers through sandstorms. But those weren't stories she needed to tell. Here, no one would believe her anyway. When lights out came, Emily lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The distant hum of generators mixed with the rustle of desert wind. She thought of her last deployment, the screaming, the chaos, the silence that followed after an explosion. She'd lost her closest friend there, another medic, Sam Ortiz. The memory flashed before her eyes, quick and sharp like lightning. She closed them, breathing deeply until her heartbeat steadied. Across the room, Ryan whispered something about her to the others, followed by muffled laughter. Emily didn't care. Let them think she was weak, soft, forgettable. It was easier that way. The less they expected from her, the more she could surprise them when it mattered. Before drifting off to sleep, she opened the small notebook she kept under her pillow. Inside were a few lines written in careful handwriting, her own words of reminder. Strength isn't noise. It's patience. It's knowing when to act and when to wait. She closed the book, tucked it away, and whispered softly to herself. Let them talk. Outside, the desert wind howled against the barracks, carrying dust across the silent training ground. Tomorrow, the shouting would start again. More drills, more tests, more taunts. But Emily Carter would endure, quietly, steadily, invisibly, just as she always had. And though no one yet realized it, the quiet recruit who blended into the background was about to become the storm that would shake the entire base. The next morning broke with a brutal desert sun. The heat had already begun its assault by 8 a.m., baking the parade ground into a shimmering mirage. Dust clung to every surface, boots, uniforms, skin. Sweat mixed with sand until everyone's face looked the same, streaked, gritty, and exhausted. The recruits were assembled in formation. Sergeant Vega's voice roared over them, echoing off the concrete walls. You think yesterday was hard? That was warm-up. Today, you'll learn what failure feels like. Emily Carter stood in the second row, eyes straight ahead, jaw steady. The recruits on either side of her shifted nervously. Some tried to stand taller when Vega's shadow passed by. Others swallowed hard, praying he wouldn't notice them. Emily didn't move at all. When Vega barked for 50 push-ups, she dropped. Instantly, her palms hitting the hot ground without hesitation. Around her, the others groaned, struggling against the heat. Ryan Haskins, ever the showman, started counting loudly, trying to lead the pack. 1, 2, 3, come on, people, keep up, he shouted between grunts. Emily kept her pace, not too fast, not too slow. Her movements were controlled, efficient. Sweat ran down her neck, but her breathing remained calm. She finished her set before many of the others. Ryan noticed, his face twisting slightly, unsure whether to be annoyed or impressed. By noon, the drills had shifted to teamwork exercises. Vega split them into groups to carry heavy sandbags across a long dirt stretch under the sun. It wasn't just about strength. It was about coordination, leadership, and endurance. Ryan's team, Emily's team, stumbled almost immediately. Lopez complained about the weight. Another recruit, Davis, dropped his end halfway through. Emily adjusted without a word, taking more of the load. Her arms burned, her shoulders trembled, but she refused to stop. Ryan barked orders, half wrong, half shouted, just to sound in control. Lopez, faster. Carter, you're dragging. He yelled, even though she was the only one keeping the rhythm. When they finally crossed the finish line, everyone collapsed in the dirt, except her. She stood quietly, catching her breath, staring at the horizon. Her ribs throbbed under her uniform, but she didn't show it. Ryan threw his helmet to the ground. We lost because some people can't keep up, he snapped, glaring at her. Emily's expression didn't change. We lost because we didn't move as one, she said evenly. You were shouting when you should have been leading. That stung. The recruits nearby went silent. Vega's whistle broke the tension. Haskins, Carter, 10 laps. If you've got energy to argue, you've got energy to run. Ryan cursed under his breath, but Emily just nodded and started jogging. The others watched as the two figures moved around the track, his steps uneven, fueled by anger, her smooth, rhythmic, calm. By the 5th lap, he was panting. By the 7th, he was glaring. She finished without a word, not even glancing his way. Later, in the barracks, Ryan slammed his locker shut. She thinks she's better than everyone, he muttered. You see how she talks? Like she knows everything. Lopez chuckled. Probably watched too many action movies. She's all quiet, so she looks mysterious. Their laughter filled the room. Emily sat on her bunk, cleaning her rifle. Her hands moved with quiet precision, checking every part, not for the mock exercise they'd run later that week, but out of habit. She could tell from the sound of a bolt if something was off. Those instincts never left. Captain Reynolds passed through the barracks then, clipboard in hand. He paused when he saw her. Carter, he said, tone neutral. You served before? Emily looked up, surprised he'd noticed. No, sir, she lied. Just here to learn. He studied her for a moment. There was something in her stillness, something that didn't belong to the nervous energy of a new recruit. Finally, he nodded. Keep it that way, he said, and walked on. That night, the base lights flickered against the endless desert. The recruits gathered near the outdoor benches, sharing stories, laughing too loud, pretending they weren't exhausted. Emily sat apart, sipping from her canteen, eyes fixed on the horizon where the mountains glowed faintly under moonlight. Lopez's voice carried through the air. Hey, Carter! You gonna sit there staring at the sand all night or actually talk to people? She looked over, calm as ever. Listening's more useful, she replied. Ryan smirked. Listening won't help you in the field. You'll freeze when things get loud. Emily set down her canteen and met his eyes. Her tone stayed quiet, but her words cut through the noise. You've never heard real loud, Haskins? You'd be surprised what silence sounds like after that. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lopez broke the tension with forced laughter. Man, she's intense. Emily turned back to the desert. The laughter faded behind her, and she felt the cool air shift across her skin. In that moment, her mind slipped back, not to the base, but to the mountains of Kandahar. The echo of mortar fire, the sound of someone screaming her name through static, the red glow of flares lighting up the night. She blinked, forcing the images away. The desert here was quieter, cleaner, but the silence carried the same weight. The next day brought weapons drills. The recruits lined up at the range, learning to aim, fire, and reload under pressure. For most of them, it was a challenge to simply control their breathing. For Emily, it was instinct. When her turn came, she adjusted her stance, shoulders relaxed, elbows tucked. Vega barked the order. Fire! Bang, bang, bang. Her shot struck near-perfect groupings on the target. The instructor raised an eyebrow. Nice work, Carter. Prior experience? She lowered her weapon. I listen well, sir. Ryan rolled his eyes. Lucky shots. Let's see her do it again. Vega nodded. Fine. 10 rounds, rapid fire. Emily didn't hesitate. The magazine clicked into place. 10 shots thundered downrange in a steady rhythm. Not rushed, not hesitating. The range fell silent as the last shell casing hit the dirt. When Vega pulled the target back, the center was shredded. No one laughed this time. Ryan forced a smirk. Doesn't mean anything. Anyone can shoot straight at paper. Emily handed back the rifle calmly. Paper doesn't shoot back, she said. For the rest of the day, no one teased her out loud. But whispers spread, quiet, uneasy whispers. Who is she really? How does she shoot like that? Even Vega seemed to watch her differently now, as if trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't been given the pieces for. That evening, Emily sat by her bunk again, polishing her boots. Across the room, Lopez whispered something to Ryan and chuckled. They were quieter about it now, but she still heard. She didn't mind. Let them talk. Words didn't weigh much, not compared to what she'd already carried. Before lights out, Captain Reynolds came through again, clipboard tucked under one arm. Tomorrow's simulation's been moved up, he said. Mock battle between teams. Capture the flag scenario. I expect teamwork, not heroics. Anyone acting like a lone wolf will regret it. Ryan grinned. Perfect chance to show who's got leadership potential, sir. Reynolds nodded. We'll see, Haskins. Leadership isn't about shouting. His gaze flicked to Emily for a moment, then back to his clipboard. Get some rest. You'll need it. When the lights dimmed, Emily lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling. A sound of snoring filled the barracks. She reached for her notebook again, flipping to a blank page. A soldier's strength isn't proven by how loud they lead, but how quiet they endure. She closed the notebook, slid it under her pillow, and exhaled slowly. Tomorrow would bring more shouting, more dust, more doubt, but it didn't matter. Because when the real test came, the mock battle everyone laughed about, they'd finally see what she'd been hiding behind those calm, steady eyes. And for the first time, it wouldn't be Emily who learned a lesson. It would be them. The desert morning began in eerie stillness. For once, there was no shouting, no drills, no running feet or clanging metal. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that settles over a base right before something big is about to happen. At dawn, a convoy of Humvees rolled into the training field, kicking up waves of dust that shimmered gold under the rising sun. Massive tents had been set up overnight, filled with communication gear, drones, and screens. Soldiers buzzed around like ants, setting up what looked less like a drill and more like a miniature war zone. By breakfast, rumors had spread through every barracks. They're doing the full-scale simulation, Lopez whispered, barely containing his excitement. Alpha versus Bravo. Capture the flag, but with live tactics. Drones, comms, terrain. The works. About time, Ryan said, grinning. Finally, a chance to show command who deserves to lead. Emily sat quietly across from them, her tray untouched. The mess hall was filled with nervous chatter, but she barely heard it. Her mind was already working, calculating the terrain, the objectives, the probabilities. This wasn't just another exercise. This was the kind of test where leadership, adaptability, and instinct separated soldiers from spectators. Captain Reynolds entered the mess hall, and the room went silent instantly. He stood tall, his uniform crisp, eyes scanning the faces before him. "Listen up," he began. "Today's simulation will last 4 hours. You'll be split into 2 teams, Alpha and Bravo. The goal: capture and hold the opposing team's flag. Rules are simple. You get hit, you're out. Your gear tracks every move, every shot, every hit. Treat it like combat, because that's how it's designed." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The winning team gets commendation points. The losing team," his gaze sharpened, "learns humility." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Ryan smirked, elbowing Lopez. "Guess we'll be teaching humility today." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "We'll see about that, Haskins." "You're leading Alpha team." Ryan puffed up instantly, chin high with pride. "Yes, sir." "Carter," Reynolds said, turning his attention to Emily. "You're assigned to Bravo team. You'll serve under Sergeant Vegas' supervision." Emily nodded. "Yes, sir." As the recruits filed out, the rivalry was already palpable. Alpha team, led by Ryan, was stacked with the strongest, loudest, most confident soldiers. Bravo team, on the other hand, looked like a mismatched group of leftovers, rookies, quiet ones, and those who barely scraped through drills. A few of them exchanged uncertain glances when they realized who they'd be up against. Vega gathered them in the staging area. "All right, listen up," he growled. "Alpha's got the advantage. More experience, better gear, and Haskins' big mouth. But that doesn't mean you roll over. Work together. Stay disciplined. This is about coordination, not ego." As he spoke, Emily scanned the terrain map projected on the screen behind him. The battlefield was massive, a stretch of rugged desert with clusters of trees, dry creek beds, and a few old concrete structures. 2 flags, one on the northern ridge, one near a shallow ravine to the south. Her mind immediately began constructing possibilities: flanking routes, choke points, sniper vantage areas, and fallback zones. She'd done this 100 times before in real operations. Only back then, the bullets weren't made of paint. When the briefing ended, Vega dismissed them. "Gear up. Simulation starts in 30. Inside the locker tent, chaos ruled. Bravo team scrambled to strap on vests, helmets, and sensors. Some joked to hide their nerves. Others fumbled with their rifles. Emily moved silently among them, checking her weapon, securing her tactical belt. Her motions were precise, practiced, almost too professional for a recruit. Lopez, who'd been assigned to her team, noticed. "You've done this before, huh?" he asked half-jokingly. Emily shrugged. "Once or twice." He laughed, not realizing she wasn't joking. Outside, Alpha team was assembling, their morale loud and infectious. Ryan strutted in front of them, rallying his troops. "Remember, speed, aggression, surprise. We crush them before they even figure out where we are." He caught sight of Emily standing quietly among Bravo's ranks. "Hey, Carter," he shouted across the yard. "Try not to trip on your rifle out there, yeah?" His teammates laughed. Emily just met his gaze and gave a small nod, not angry, not flustered, just calm, almost unnervingly calm. The horn blew. The teams loaded into separate transport trucks and drove out to opposite ends of the field. Dust whipped through the open backs as the vehicles bounced over uneven terrain. The recruits clutched their rifles, adrenaline building. Emily sat still, eyes on the horizon. When they reached the drop zone, Vega jumped out first. "Bravo, move out!" They spread into formation, half-heartedly at first, struggling to keep pace. The first hour was chaos. Radio chatter overlapped, commands contradicted each other, and people kept tripping over loose sandbags. Vega growled in frustration. Emily watched quietly from the rear. Her instinct screamed that this disorganization would get them wiped out fast. And then, right on cue, gunfire erupted. Rapid bursts of paint rounds splattering from the ridge. "Contact!" Someone shouted. Alpha Team had ambushed them. Within minutes, Bravo Team scattered, half of them eliminated, before they even knew where the shots came from. Vega yelled into the comms. "Regroup! Regroup, damn IT!" But the comms were jammed, a tactical move by Alpha. The ambush had worked perfectly. Emily dropped low, crawling behind a fallen log. She adjusted her earpiece, scanning for an open frequency. Static hissed in her ear. No luck. Around her, Bravo soldiers were panicking, running for cover in different directions. She took a slow breath, forcing her mind to quiet. Panic wasted time. Action saved it. Through the crack of her visor, she caught sight of Ryan up on the ridge, signaling his team with hand gestures. They were moving in a sweep formation, trying to corner what was left of Bravo. He was smart enough to capitalize on confusion, but sloppy enough to leave his flank open. Emily tapped her mic again, whispering into the static. "Anyone copy?" A faint voice came through. "Carter? It's Davis. I'm by the dry creek. Everyone's gone." "Stay there," she said. "Don't move. I'll find you." She crawled along the ridge, staying low, moving like shadow. Every sound, wind, footsteps, shifting sand, felt amplified. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of her breaths. When she reached a cluster of rocks, she spotted 2 Alpha soldiers advancing down the slope. She waited, patient, until they were close. Then she raised her rifle, 2 precise shots. Paint rounds splattered across their vests. Their sensors beeped, signaling elimination. "Bravo, that's 2 down," the automated system confirmed. Vega's voice cut faintly through the comms. "Who was that?" "Carter," she said. There was a brief silence, then Vega's tone softened slightly. "Good work. Keep your head down." Emily smiled faintly. "Always do, sir." For the next 20 minutes, she moved methodically through the terrain, helping isolated teammates regroup, marking enemy positions, and quietly dismantling Alpha's advantage. Every move she made was controlled, efficient, a product of experience no one here knew she had. By the time the first hour ended, Bravo had taken fewer new losses than expected, thanks almost entirely to her. But the others still didn't fully realize it. They just saw the results without seeing the hands guiding them. At Command HQ, Captain Reynolds watched the live tracking feed. Small dots representing each soldier blinked across the map. His eyes narrowed as one dot, labeled Carter, E, began moving in complex patterns around the enemy markers, cutting off flanks, taking out opponents with surgical precision. "Who trained her?" one of the analysts asked. Reynolds didn't answer. He just folded his arms and leaned closer to the screen. "Let's see how far she goes." Back on the ground, Emily crouched behind a ridge, scanning the horizon. The sun was higher now, glaring through the dust. Her uniform clung to her skin. But she felt alive, calm, centered, exactly where she belonged. The game wasn't over. Not even close. For Alpha Team, it was just another chance to win. For Emily Carter, it was the moment everything would change. The desert night was colder than anyone expected. The recruits had been awake since dawn, running drills under a relentless sun. And now, As darkness draped over Fort Irwin, they stood in formation for their final debrief before the upcoming Operation Iron Dune, the live simulation scheduled for sunrise. Sergeant Vega paced in front of them, his boots crunching in the gravel. "Tomorrow," he began, "you will face the most intense training scenario of this cycle. You'll move through unknown terrain, engage simulated enemies, and capture a strategic base. Every mistake will cost you points, and maybe your pride." He stopped, scanning each face. "Out there, your rank means nothing. Your teamwork means everything." His eyes paused on Emily Carter, as if testing her again. "And that includes you, Carter. No heroics. You follow orders. Understood?" "Yes, Sergeant," she replied, her voice calm, steady. Vega nodded once. "Dismissed." The recruits scattered, some heading toward the barracks, others lingering by the vehicles to talk strategy. Ryan Haskins gathered his team around a map spread over the hood of a Humvee. "All right," he said, tapping the map with a marker. "The base we're supposed to infiltrate is set up here, Northridge. We'll move out in 2 teams. I'll take point with Lopez and Sanders. Carter, your rear support, communications and med gear." Emily studied the layout silently. "That's a narrow ridge," she said after a moment. "If the enemy's waiting there, we'll be trapped with no cover." Ryan frowned. "It's a simulation, Carter. Not a real ambush." "Doesn't mean they won't think like one," she replied quietly. "The trainers set it up to break our formation. That's what they always do." Ryan rolled his eyes. "Relax, soldier. I've got it handled." Emily didn't argue. She knew better than to push, not tonight. She only nodded, memorizing every contour of the terrain in her mind. She'd learned long ago that silence could be her sharpest weapon. By dawn, the desert had turned to gold. The air was cool but dry, carrying the distant whine of engines and radio chatter. The recruits were loaded into transport trucks, faces streaked with dust, helmets strapped tight. The convoy moved east, deeper into the training grounds, a vast sea of sand and rock that stretched for miles. "Operation Iron Dune commence," Vega's voice crackled over the radio. "Blue team, you are go for infiltration." Ryan adjusted his earpiece and signaled his group to move. Emily followed silently, her rifle slung over her shoulder, scanning the horizon. The first hour went smoothly. They moved in formation, low and quiet, navigating the ridges and dry riverbeds. The simulated combat zone looked eerily realistic, fake corpses scattered, burned-out vehicles, and a mock village ahead. But something felt off. The silence was too perfect. No bursts of gunfire. No distant echoes of other squads. Emily's instincts prickled. She slowed her pace, eyes flicking to the cliffs above them. "Keep up, Carter," Ryan whispered. "You're lagging." She stopped. "Something's wrong." Before he could respond, the ridge exploded. A deafening boom tore through the air, as smoke and sand erupted around them. Recruits hit the ground, shouting. Gunfire crackled from the hills, blank rounds, but the sound and flashes were real enough to spike adrenaline through every vein. Contact. Northridge. Someone screamed. Ryan's face twisted. Ambush, defensive line. The squad scrambled behind rocks and sandbags. Emily crawled low, dragging a wounded recruit, a kid named Myers, who'd taken a hard fall when the explosion hit. His leg was twisted awkwardly, and though the round wasn't real, the injury was. "I got you," she said, tightening a tourniquet around his thigh. "Carter, stay down." Ryan yelled. "We'll cover you." But she was already moving. While the others fired blanks toward the ridge, Emily slid between positions, analyzing the enemy fire pattern. They weren't just playing defense, they were flanking. She pressed her radio. "Sergeant Vega, Blue team under heavy fire. Requesting confirmation on enemy positions. Static. No reply. She switched frequencies. Still nothing. Their comms were jammed. Ryan! She shouted over the gunfire. They've cut our line. We're blind. He looked at her, panicked for the first time. Then what do we do? Emily's mind raced. The enemy team wasn't supposed to have jamming capabilities. Someone had changed the parameters. Maybe Vega had done it to test them, or maybe another instructor team had taken over. Either way, this wasn't by the book. She took a breath and crouched behind a rock. We need to move now. They're pushing us into the open. Ryan hesitated, then snapped. I'm giving the orders. Another explosion went off, closer this time, pelting them with sand. 2 recruits cried out as shrapnel from a detonated prop hit their gear. Emily's patience snapped. You keep barking orders, and we're all dead, simulation or not. She said sharply, eyes locked on his. For a moment, everything froze. The wind, the gunfire, even Ryan's arrogance. There was something in her voice he'd never heard before. Authority. Real, raw, earned authority. Then she moved. Emily sprinted low through the smoke, grabbing a flashbang from her belt, not part of the standard recruit loadout, but one she'd slipped into her gear with permission from Vega. She lobbed it toward the ridge. A white explosion lit up the hillside, and the enemy silhouettes ducked instinctively. Move, she shouted. The squad surged forward, following her lead. She darted ahead, using hand signals to direct them around the left flank. Her movements were precise, tactical. Every step, every turn came from experience, not training. Within minutes, they reached the base of the ridge. Emily climbed first, pulling herself up with surprising speed. At the top, she spotted 3 of the opposing enemy soldiers, older trainees acting as role players. She took them out one by one with perfect accuracy, using her Miles rifle, the sensor lights blinking to signal simulated kills. Below, Ryan and the others watched in stunned silence as the woman they'd dismissed days ago moved like a professional operator. When the last enemy fell, Emily waved them forward. Clear the ridge. They scrambled up, panting, eyes wide. The training base below was quiet again, the air thick with dust and disbelief. Ryan approached her slowly, chest heaving. What the hell was that? Emily wiped sweat from her brow. Adaptation, she said simply. Vega's voice suddenly cut through their radios again. Blue team, cease fire. Simulation over. The team froze. Vega's tone was sharp, unreadable. Return to base for debrief. Back at the compound, tension hung like smoke. Vega stood in the center of the room, arms crossed, eyes locked on Emily. Carter, he said, voice low. You led that counter-assault? Yes, Sergeant. You broke formation, disobeyed direct orders, and you saved your entire team. The room went silent. Ryan looked away, jaw tight. Vega stepped closer. I don't know where you learned to move like that, but I bet my stripes it wasn't from any boot camp. Emily said nothing. Her gaze stayed steady. After a moment, Vega's hard expression softened, just slightly. You've got something most don't, not just skill, instinct. But be careful, Carter. In this world, people don't like being outshined. She nodded. Understood, Sergeant. As the recruits filed out, Ryan lingered, glancing back at her. His pride was cracked, but not gone. Who are you really? He asked under his breath. Emily met his eyes. Just a recruit, she said softly. Like you. But as she walked away, Vega watched her go, and he knew, just as the rest of them would soon find out, that Emily Carter was anything but just a recruit. The desert wind had finally died by the time evening rolled over Fort Irwin. The horizon burned a deep orange as the sun sank behind the mountains, throwing long shadows across the training compound. The recruits were exhausted, their bodies bruised, their pride fractured, especially Ryan's. They'd survived Operation Iron Dune, but the victory felt uneasy. Emily's name whispered through the barracks, like a rumor no one could quite explain. She took out the whole enemy team alone, someone muttered near the bunks. Vega said it wasn't even part of the simulation, another replied. Who is she, man? No way, she's just a recruit. Emily sat quietly on her bunk, cleaning her rifle piece by piece. She could feel their eyes on her, but didn't look up. The rhythm of the cleaning kept her grounded. Slide, click, wipe, inspect. It was the same ritual she'd done before every real mission, long before she ever stepped onto this base. Ryan sat across from her, his posture stiff. He hadn't said a word to her since the debrief. His pride had been wounded, and she could see it in the way he avoided her gaze. Finally, he spoke. You could have gotten us killed out there. Emily didn't look up. Or saved you. Depends how you measure it. He leaned forward. That was training, not a battlefield. You don't make calls like that here. You follow orders. Emily met his eyes, calm, unflinching. I've followed orders before, and buried the people who gave them. Ryan froze. Her tone wasn't angry. It was quiet, flat, but behind it was a history that didn't belong in a classroom or training yard. Before he could respond, Sergeant Vega's voice echoed from the doorway. Carter, with me. Emily stood, snapped to attention, and followed him out. The rest of the recruits fell silent as the door closed behind her. The hallway outside Vega's office was dim, lit only by the pale glow of a single overhead bulb. Inside, a file lay open on his desk, her file. But something about it looked wrong. Too thin, too redacted. Vega didn't sit. He stood behind the desk, his eyes studying her. You've been busy today, Carter. Yes, Sergeant. He gestured toward the file. I did some digging after the exercise. Thought I'd see what makes a recruit move like a ranger and think like a tactician. But this, he tapped the folder, isn't much. No detailed background, no previous assignments, just a transfer note from a medical unit overseas. Classified clearance levels. You want to explain that? Emily stayed silent. Her heartbeat slowed. He found it. Vega stepped closer. You know what I think? I think you're not supposed to be here. You've seen combat before, real combat. She met his eyes, but said nothing. Vega sighed, running a hand over his shaved head. Look, I'm not here to punish you. I've been in long enough to recognize experience when I see it. But the question is, why hide it? Emily's gaze dropped to the edge of his desk. Because sometimes experience gets people killed, Sergeant. That caught him off guard. She finally looked up. Afghanistan. Forward Operating Base Tarin Kaut. I was a medic, 3rd Battalion, 75th Rangers. Our convoy was ambushed en route Kilo. I was the only one left breathing after it ended. Her voice didn't tremble, but her eyes did. They called me home after that. Said I was too unfit for active duty. Too many ghosts. Vega listened silently, his jaw tightening. And you signed up again. Under a new unit. I didn't want to sit behind a desk, she said softly. So, I volunteered for a retraining program. Figured if I started from the bottom, no one would know. No one would look at me like I was broken. Vega exhaled slowly. You're not broken, Carter. You're forged. But Emily shook her head. You say that until someone gets hurt again. That's why I keep quiet. It's easier to just be nobody. The room went quiet. Vega studied her for a long moment, not as a drill instructor now, but as a soldier who'd seen his own share of ghosts. Finally, he said, "You may want to be nobody, Carter. But after today, that's not possible anymore." He closed the folder and locked it in his drawer. "What you did out there saved your unit. You've got instincts this army needs. Just ... Try not to outshine your team too much. You're making my other recruits look bad." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Yes, Sergeant." Dismissed. Outside, the night had deepened. Emily walked back to the barracks under a blanket of stars. The desert stretched endlessly around her, silent, indifferent, eternal. She liked that about it. The desert didn't ask questions. It didn't care who she used to be. When she returned, the others pretended not to stare. But curiosity was eating them alive. Lopez whispered, "What did the sergeant want?" "Paperwork," she replied shortly, dropping her gear on the floor. Ryan didn't press. But something in his expression shifted. Not anger now, but confusion. Doubt. He was starting to realize there was more to her than a quiet attitude and steady aim. Later that night, while everyone slept, Vega sat alone in his office again, the lamp flickering softly over his desk. He pulled open the drawer and took out Emily's file. He stared at the single redacted line that caught his attention earlier, one that made no sense. Status: Kier. Confirmed, July 2020. He frowned. That wasn't possible. She was standing in front of him just hours ago. He reached for the secure line and called the records division at Fort Bragg. "This is Sergeant Daniel Vega. Fort Irwin. I need a verification on a personnel file. Emily Carter. Service number 4457A9. A pause. The man on the other end shuffled papers, then replied, "Carter, Emily. According to our database, that file's closed. Deceased in action, Afghanistan. Confirmed by Field Command." Vega's grip tightened on the phone. "That can't be right." "That's what it says, Sergeant. Body never recovered. Status remains KIA." The line went dead. Vega leaned back in his chair, the silence pressing heavy on his chest. He looked again at her photo clipped to the file. The same calm eyes, the same quiet strength. If she was supposed to be dead, then who exactly was sleeping 2 doors down in his barracks? In the barracks, Emily sat upright in her bunk, wide awake. She'd known Vega would make that call eventually. She'd felt the shift in his tone earlier. Her dog tags, the old ones, hung from her wrist like a ghost she couldn't shake. The military had declared her dead after the Taring Kaut ambush. And for a while, she had wanted to believe it, too. That she was dead, at least the part of her that had screamed for help in the sand while the convoy burned around her. But she hadn't died. She'd crawled out of that wreckage, barely breathing, and disappeared into a classified recovery program that erased her from every database. A ghost soldier, technically unaccounted for. Now she was here, trying to rebuild something human. But the past never stayed buried for long. Outside, a faint rumble echoed from the desert, a convoy returning late from night maneuvers. Emily watched the headlights drift past the window, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. "You can run from war," she thought, "but it always finds you again." She lay back, closing her eyes, knowing Vega wouldn't sleep tonight either. Tomorrow, the questions would come. And soon after, something far more dangerous than training would follow. Because ghosts, no matter how silent, always leave tracks in the sand. The sun had barely risen over Fort Irwin when the base's intercom buzzed sharply, waking the recruits. The crisp desert morning carried an unusual tension. The air smelled faintly of dust and ozone, like a storm approaching. "Attention, all personnel," the voice crackled. "A new training exercise will commence immediately. All units report to designated staging areas. Mission parameters classified. This is mandatory for all active recruits. Emily Carter was already awake, sitting on the edge of her bunk. She didn't react to the announcement. Not with shock, not with anxiety. Her heartbeat remained calm, almost measured. She had a history of waking to alarms far worse than any base intercom could signal. Ryan Haskins was bouncing on his heels, slapping Lopez on the back. Finally, another chance to prove who's top dog. Emily ignored him, gathering her gear methodically. Each motion precise. Rifle checked, magazine loaded, tactical belt secured. Her eyes flicked to the horizon, scanning the distant ridges where shadows of terrain shifts suggested movement. She had been here before, not on this field, but on battlefields far worse, where every shadow could conceal an enemy. Vega had already assembled Bravo team near the staging tents. The recruits shuffled in, murmuring under their breath, tension thick enough to taste. "Good morning," Vega said, arms folded. "You all survived yesterday's exercise, but that was a warm-up. Today, we simulate urban insertion under hostile conditions. I'll be observing, but you are on your own out there. Rules are simple. Adapt, survive, and complete the objective. Minimal contact with command. Everything else is up to you." Emily's pulse quickened, but not with fear. Anticipation. The scenario was designed to be unpredictable, and she thrived in unpredictability. Ryan leaned toward her, smirking. "Rear support again? Or are we finally going to see you in the spotlight?" Emily's lips twitched in a faint smile. "You might want to watch where you step today," she said softly. The convoy to the exercise zone was quiet. Alpha and Bravo teams were loaded into separate vehicles. The desert stretched endlessly around them, the faint heat ripples already beginning to distort the landscape. Emily sat in the back of the Humvee, scanning the horizon through the slats. She could almost sense movement, a faint disturbance in the sand and brush. Inside her vest, a hidden earpiece vibrated with an encrypted signal she had set up for herself, something Vega didn't know about. She listened carefully. The frequency was quiet, subtle, but it carried information. Wind patterns, movement indicators, distant sensor pings. Not necessary for the simulation, but a precaution. Old instincts die hard. By the time the vehicles stopped at the insertion point, Vega's voice came through the radio once more. "Bravo team, move out. Objective coordinates uploaded to your devices. First checkpoint, the Northern Industrial Compound. You have 2 hours to infiltrate and neutralize simulated hostiles. Move." Emily leaped out first, landing lightly on the sand. She motioned silently to the recruits behind her, guiding them through a narrow canyon path that would provide cover. The others followed, hesitating at first, but her quiet confidence drew them in. Within minutes, the exercise escalated beyond anything they had expected. Smoke grenades erupted from unseen positions. The enemy team was aggressive, coordinated, and using advanced tactics. But what struck Emily was subtle. They weren't playing by the usual simulation rules. Sensor readings indicated something different, something deliberate. She crouched behind a boulder and whispered to Lopez, "They've upgraded the simulation. This isn't just a drill. They're testing individual decision-making under stress." Lopez gulped. "So it's like yesterday?" Worse, she thought. Yesterday, the chaos had been messy, but controlled. Today, someone had raised the stakes without telling them. She scanned the horizon. 2 figures moved along a ridge. Alpha operatives? Role players? She couldn't tell. But the precision of their approach suggested training far beyond the recruits. "Stay low," she whispered. "Follow my lead." The group moved carefully, Emily directing with hand signals. They approached a small building marked as the checkpoint. Inside, sensors blinked red. The enemy had set up a trap. Emily motioned for the team to halt. Then, almost imperceptibly, she ducked through a side window and crouched, scanning the empty room. The floor was clear, but the shadows whispered danger. 2 trainees were crawling across the floor, Alpha team disguised as hostiles. With a calm exhale, she dropped low, firing her Miles rifle. 2 precise hits, sensors beeped confirmation, and the team followed her lead. Within moments, the building was secure, and Bravo team had gained a foothold. Ryan, watching from a ridge nearby, recognized the pattern. Emily was orchestrating every move, a ghost leading in silence. The exercise intensified. Communications became sporadic. Smoke grenades, laser markers, and sound simulators created chaos, but Emily moved like a shadow. Each step was calculated, precise, instinct-driven. She covered her team, neutralized threats, and even retrieved a wounded recruit from a simulated casualty zone. Vega watched from the control tower, impressed despite himself. He muttered into his radio, "Carter is not a recruit. She's something else entirely." But it wasn't only Vega who noticed. Unknown to anyone, an automated feed from a drone picked up anomalies in Emily's movements. Each sensor ping, each tactical adjustment, mirrored patterns of someone with real-world combat experience. The system flagged her profile. Meanwhile, Emily's mind wandered briefly to the past. Tarin Kaut, the explosion, the screams, the silence that followed. Ghosts of that day had never left her. She pushed them aside, focusing entirely on the present. She had her team. She had her mission. And she had something no one else on the field did: experience forged in life-or-death situations. The final challenge of the exercise was a simulated enemy stronghold. The team had to breach it, secure the location, and extract a hostage. Emily signaled the recruits to fan out, covering entry points. The other soldiers hesitated, waiting for Ryan to lead, but he had no answers. Emily took initiative. Sliding along the wall, she neutralized the first enemy with a swift, precise shot. The others followed, gaining confidence from her example. Within minutes, they had subdued the entire stronghold. Bravo team completed the mission, but it was clear who had led them. When the smoke cleared, Ryan approached her, chest heaving, frustration and awe mingling in his expression. I don't understand. You weren't supposed to be able to do that." Emily wiped dust from her sleeve. "I wasn't following orders, Ryan. I was surviving. Sometimes that's the same thing." Vega appeared beside them, arms crossed, silent for a moment before speaking. "Carter, report. How did your team coordinate that efficiently while under full assault?" "Instinct, sir," she replied. "And experience. You train people for scenarios they haven't faced yet. I've seen scenarios like this. In real life." Vega's eyes narrowed. "You're hiding more than just skills." Emily gave a faint nod. "Yes, Sergeant. But some things are better left hidden, until they're necessary." As the recruits returned to base, Emily slipped aside, heading for the barracks. She knew that Vega would investigate further. Already, she could feel the gears turning in his mind, connecting dots that weren't supposed to be connected. In the shadows of the barracks, she paused by the window, looking out over the desert. The night wind whispered through the sand, carrying with it memories she couldn't shake. Ghosts of the past, alive and waiting. Somewhere out there, she knew, someone still remembered her from Tarin Kaut, the people who had tried to write her off as dead. And now, with Vega watching, and the entire base unknowingly relying on her, she was caught between being invisible and being indispensable. And Emily Carter had never been one to choose the safe path. Tomorrow would bring another test. A test where silence could be deadly, and instinct could be the difference between survival and annihilation. She inhaled, calm, steady, ready. because the shadow that everyone thought was gone was very much alive. The desert sun was just rising, casting long, jagged shadows across the Fort Irwin training grounds. Today's exercise wasn't just another simulation. It was a full-scale leave combat scenario. Alpha and Bravo teams had been deployed in opposite sectors, and the stakes were higher than ever. The instructors had made it clear: survive, complete the mission, and no outside help. Emily Carter adjusted her tactical vest, checking every strap and buckle. Her rifle was polished and ready, her earpiece secure. Her team had been eliminated early, not because she failed, but because Vega wanted to see her operate alone. She didn't hesitate. This was her element. The simulated enemy stronghold lay half a mile ahead, tucked into a natural canyon. Heat shimmered off the sand, hiding enemy silhouettes in the shifting light. Emily crouched behind the ridge, observing. Ryan Haskins was somewhere up ahead with the remaining Alpha team, still trying to coordinate a push into the compound. But this wasn't about him. This was about survival, precision, and silence. Emily's mind worked like clockwork. She mapped the terrain, calculated the enemy's likely patrol routes, and noted the few blind spots where she could advance undetected. Every movement she made was deliberate, every breath controlled. She slipped from her cover and began her approach, low and silent. The first enemy sentry stepped into view, scanning with laser sensors. Emily froze, holding her breath. When the guard turned, she moved, swift, silent, precise. One shot from her Miles rifle, and the sensor beeped, eliminated. She pressed forward, sliding along the canyon walls. Smoke grenades detonated behind her as other Alpha soldiers engaged the perimeter, drawing fire away from her. They thought they could cover her movements. They didn't know she didn't need cover. She was the storm. Inside the compound, chaos erupted. Miles' sensors blinked red as simulated combatants engaged. Emily moved like a shadow, sticking to walls, crouching low, and advancing without hesitation. Every enemy she neutralized was precise. No wasted movements, no panicked shots. A role-playing enemy soldier lunged at her from behind a crate. She twisted, fired twice, and the Miles system registered her strike. The remaining combatants froze, assessing the breach. Emily ducked into a building at the center of the compound. The objective, a simulated hostage, waited inside. The room was empty except for the target, a mannequin rigged with sensors to simulate a live person. She checked the sensors. Operational. Her movements were quick, but calculated as she positioned herself to extract the hostage. But as she moved, a faint noise caught her attention, a shadow slipping past a side door. Her instincts screamed. Not a simulation. Not random. She turned and fired. Another 2 kills confirmed. One of the Alpha team role players fell, and the rest hesitated. They didn't realize the true threat wasn't the team they were fighting, but the solitary soldier in their midst. Outside, Ryan Haskins and the remaining recruits watched the live tracking feed from a drone. Emily's dot moved with precision, cutting through enemy positions like a blade through silk. Ryan's jaw tightened. "That's impossible," he muttered. Vega, observing from the tower, leaned over the tablet. "She's operating alone. Look at the patterns, movement, targeting, timing. This is someone who survived real firefights." A flash of recognition crossed Vega's face. Carter's not just a recruit. She's a combat veteran. Back in the compound, Emily moved to secure the hostage. Sensors indicated enemy activity converging on her location. She ducked low, pushing the mannequin into a defensive corner. Then she devised her next move, create a diversion. She tossed a small smoke grenade toward the east entrance, then slipped through a back corridor. The enemy rushed toward the smoke, leaving the primary exit unguarded. Emily grabbed the mannequin and moved like water through the shadows, slipping out unseen. The desert outside the compound was a maze of rocks, ridges, and dry creek beds. Emily navigated it with a skill no recruit should possess. Every movement was calculated, every shadow a potential threat she neutralized before it became one. She could hear distant shouts from the Alpha team, but they were far behind. The simulated exercise had become a one-person mission. The reality, she had to rely on her own instincts, her training, and her nerves of steel. A drone overhead caught her movement patterns, relaying them to Vega. He tapped his comm, speaking to the base. "I need every instructor watching the feed. You're looking at a soldier who should have been declared Kier years ago. And yet, here she is, leading a one-person assault perfectly." Emily spotted a final obstacle, a narrow canyon that led to the extraction point. Enemy sensors were scattered along its walls. She crouched, eyes scanning every shadow. Timing her movements with the wind and the sunlight, she sprinted across exposed ground, sliding behind boulders, ducking behind low walls, and eliminating the last simulated combatants along the path. Her breathing remained calm, even as adrenaline coursed through her veins. Every step was instinctual, every shot precise. This was no simulation. This was survival. Finally, she reached the extraction point. The sensors confirmed. Mission complete. Bravo team had secured the objective, but it was entirely due to her actions. She waited, crouched behind a rock, and exhaled. The debriefing back at Fort Irwin was tense. Instructors crowded around the screens, showing Emily's performance. The room fell silent as the feed replayed. One lone recruit systematically neutralizing the enemy and extracting the hostage. Vega's eyes met hers across the table. "Explain." Emily adjusted her vest. "I followed the mission parameters. I adapted to the threats as they presented themselves. That's all, Sergeant." The room was quiet. Ryan Haskins, normally loud and brash, sat with his mouth open. He had no words. Vega finally spoke, voice low but commanding. "Carter, your skill level is off the charts. But this isn't just talent. It's experience. Real experience." Emily nodded. "Yes, Sergeant. But it's the experience I was trained to hide." Vega leaned back, folding his arms. "You're going to make people question everything about you, your background, your abilities, and your very presence here." Emily's gaze drifted to the window, looking out at the desert. "Let them," she said quietly. "If they can't see it, it doesn't matter." For Ryan, the realization hit like a thunderclap. This woman, whom he had underestimated, had carried an entire mission alone, and there was nothing he could do to change the fact. That night, as the recruits slept, Emily sat outside the barracks under the stars. The desert was quiet, deceptively quiet. Her mind replayed the day's events, the breaches, the kills, the extraction. Each movement had been precise, deliberate, calculated from years of experience no one else knew she had. Yet, the weight of her past pressed on her. She had survived Taring Kaut, survived being declared KIA, survived missions that should have killed her, and now she was here, tested again, alone in the field, proving to everyone she was more than a recruit. Somewhere in the shadows, she knew others were watching. Instructors, command personnel, and perhaps even those who had once written her off as dead. And she would be ready, because Emily Carter had never been a recruit in the traditional sense. She was a shadow in the sand, a ghost with unmatched skill, and the day everyone realized it was finally here. And when it was over, there would be no doubt. The desert sun was rising like fire over the horizon, painting the sand in shades of orange and crimson. Emily Carter crouched behind a jagged boulder, scanning the distant industrial compound where the final phase of the training simulation was underway. The objective: infiltrate, neutralize, and extract. But this wasn't just about skill anymore. The instructors had made it clear that today, she would face the full force of the enemy team, and there would be no support from her squad. The rest of Bravo Team had been eliminated or dispersed, leaving her alone. But Emily thrived under these conditions. Silence, isolation, danger. This was the environment that forged true soldiers. Ryan Haskins' Alpha Team watched from a nearby ridge, drones feeding the live battlefield data back to them. They could see Emily moving through the open terrain, low to the ground, almost invisible against the desert's harsh light. Ryan's jaw was clenched, frustration evident. "She's doing this alone," he muttered. "How is she moving like that? That's not human." Vega, observing from the command tower, narrowed his eyes. "That's not a recruit. That's a soldier who survived firefights no one here could even imagine. Watch carefully. This is how professionals handle threats." Emily's eyes flicked over the compound. Enemy role players had set up barricades, sensors, and patrolling units, but she had already memorized their movements during previous surveillance. Timing was everything. She slipped from cover, using a combination of shadow, terrain, and instinct to navigate past the first set of guards. Her Miles rifle moved like an extension of her arm, eliminating each enemy silently with precision shots. Each sensor beep confirmed a kill, and with every step, she tightened her control over the battlefield. One guard tried to flank her from the right. Emily spun, firing twice, neutralizing him instantly. Another approached from behind. She rolled to the side, fired, and the sensor registered the hit. They had underestimated her, and that mistake would cost them. Inside the main compound, chaos erupted. Smoke grenades went off, alarms blared, and yet Emily moved like a shadow through the mayhem. She didn't panic. Every door she opened, every corridor she traversed, was calculated. She cleared rooms systematically, marking enemy positions on her earpiece map for the scattered Bravo team members who were still alive in simulation. Her presence was commanding, even without words. She had become the ghost they hadn't expected. The enemy team had gone from confident to cautious, unsure of how one soldier could dismantle their entire strategy. Outside, Ryan was whispering into his comms. "We need to regroup. She's moving faster than we anticipated." But even Alpha Team couldn't react fast enough. Emily had taken control of the terrain, exploiting every blind spot, every angle of approach. Each enemy eliminated silently, methodically, until the compound was largely neutralized. Vega leaned closer to the monitors. "Notice the pattern," he said to the instructors nearby. "She's not just shooting, she's predicting, anticipating, controlling the battlefield. That's not training. That's instinct." The final obstacle was the command center, heavily guarded and fortified. Emily crouched outside the reinforced door, analyzing patrols, sensor patterns, and entry points. She had only one option: go in fast, precise, and leave nothing to chance. She slipped through a side corridor, firing 3 quick, precise shots to disable the first 2 guards. The third tried to raise an alarm, but Emily closed the distance, disarming him and knocking him unconscious silently. She reached the command terminal. With a quick scan, she disabled the simulated communication system, the last threat to the mission. Then she grabbed the simulated intelligence cache, securing it in her tactical pack. The extraction point was still 100 meters away, but the mission was complete. She had neutralized all threats and secured the objective alone. Outside, the desert fell silent. Even the instructors paused to watch. Vega muttered under his breath, "I've never seen anything like that. Not from a recruit. Not from anyone." Ryan Haskins arrived at the extraction point moments later, along with the remaining Alpha Team members. They found Emily standing calmly, dusting sand from her uniform, holding the secured objective. No one said a word at first. The shock was too great. Finally, Ryan spoke, voice low. I didn't think anyone could do that alone. Emily turned to him. I didn't either, she said softly. Until I had to. Vega approached, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Carter, report. How did you manage the extraction alone? Emily met his gaze. By moving like I was trained to survive, not just follow orders. Adapt, anticipate, and act. Vega nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You've made a mockery of every standard protocol here. But you've proven one thing. You are not just a recruit. You're a soldier unlike any I've ever trained. Back at the barracks, news of Emily's performance spread like wildfire. Recruits whispered her name, amazed, terrified, and in awe. No one dared challenge her after today. Not Ryan, not Alpha Team, and certainly not the remaining Bravo members who had witnessed her precision and control firsthand. Emily, however, remained quiet. She cleaned her rifle, methodically, as if the events of the day were routine. But inside, a sense of calm satisfaction settled over her. She had proven something, not just to the instructors, not just to her peers, but to herself. She wasn't a recruit. She was a ghost who had returned stronger, more skilled, and more unyielding than ever. As night fell over the base, Vega watched Emily from the command tower. His eyes followed her as she walked back to her bunk. She's a living legend, he muttered to himself. And she just reminded everyone here that skill doesn't come from rank or reputation. It comes from surviving when no one else can. In the barracks, Ryan sat silently, staring at her empty bunk. Pride and frustration battled inside him. Who is she really? He whispered. But Emily was already gone, sitting alone outside under the stars, looking out over the desert. The wind whispered through the sand, carrying with it the ghosts of her past, the missions she had survived, the teammates she had lost, the moments when life and death hung on a single choice. And yet, she remained, unbroken, unseen, unmatched, because the soldier everyone had dismissed as just a recruit had proven one undeniable truth. She could take out an entire enemy team alone and leave everyone else silent in awe. The desert stretched endlessly before her, quiet now, but full of potential. And Emily Carter, the shadow, the ghost, the survivor, was ready for whatever came next.